When is an all-women's conference not sufficiently female? When race matters more than gender, of course. Next on the Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment this week focuses on St. Catherine University in Minnesota shutting down their own women's conference because they failed to invite enough women of color. To talk more about this, we welcome Matthew Stein, a political science and economics major at Swarthmore College and a journalist at the College Fix. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Your article is really quite interesting and I think on a lot of levels. Talk first about the process. How did you find out about this story, and how did you go about researching it?
Thanks so much for having me on, Dr. Duke. So basically, my editor was the one who assigned me this story. And then as soon as I started looking into it, I thought it was a pretty interesting story to pursue. So basically, the first thing I did was just reach out to the members of the college, reach out to the president's office. They don't have a real media relations office. So I just reached out to a couple of deans and then the president's office, and no one got back to me, lo and behold. So then after that, I decided to reach out to all the different speakers, and I reached out to just about a dozen speakers. And then it was kind of a similar story there. A lot of them replied but refused to answer the questions or send me the email, which was sent to them by the administration telling them that the event had been canceled. So no one was really very cooperative when I was researching the story.
So that's remarkable, but not surprising, right? The administration itself went dark, and you reached out to an amazing number of the potential participants in this conference, and not one of them really got back to you. So when you see an article like this as a journalist, is there a particular angle that hits you immediately when you sift through the facts of what happened? And take a second first and tell us about the facts of the conference. And then the second question I'm going to ask you, the follow-up is, did you see an angle? Was there a particular way you wanted to pursue this? So talk about what actually happened with the conference at St. Catherine's College.
So the event was set to take place in January, and it was basically kind of a women's empowerment conference. It's an all-women's college. They were going to have a lot of professional speakers come in who were all women to try to explain to some of the female undergrads how they should go about trying to be a leader when they're older. That's why it was called the leadership imperative. And so they basically chose a speaker list based on a race-blind speaking process, selection process. And ultimately, they came up with 29 speakers who were all 100% white. And so that's presumably why they ended up canceling the event, based on the reporting that I got from the Minnesota Republic. They told the speakers that it had nothing to do with the content of their presentations or the quality of their speaking. The reason they canceled it had everything to do with their desire to create a more diverse world and a better world for tomorrow. So basically, why this is such a compelling story is it's basic racism. That's probably why they didn't want to respond. It's basically the political correctness gone wild kind of thing, where they can't accept. They have to look at the race of the participants. It has nothing to do with the content of their speeches, as they directly said.
Is that the first thing when you sat down to the editor assigned this story to you? Do you, as a journalist, do you try to find a hook like that? Try to figure out what is the main core of a story, or do you let the story unfold by trying to talk to people, assuming they'll talk to you at all, trying to talk to people and get a better sense of the perspective of the people involved? How do you write these kinds of stories? Do you have an angle that you come at?
Well, honestly, it's a little bit of both. I think as soon as you select a story, you have to have a basic point that you're trying to make in the article and a basic angle to pursue. And then sometimes when you reach out to the participants, something else happens, and then the angle changes. In this case, obviously, the participants didn't respond to me, so we just had to go with the angle that we originally pursued. But it's definitely a bit of both. You can't just be rigid to the same angle, but you have to have an angle when you're starting to pursue the story in the first place.
What you said a moment ago is really, really interesting to me, and it gets to the heart of the matter, I think, that this was a race-blind process, supposedly, right? That they were trying to contact powerful women of influence, women who would make a difference in the lives of these primarily undergraduate females at St. Catherine's University. And as you said, when it all shook out, they didn't have enough, or really any women of color, which then, this is the troubling aspect of it, they then canceled the entire conference instead of trying to broaden it or even make that, if that's something that really interested these women, race was something that they were interested in, why not make that a part of the conference? Why the extreme having to cancel the whole thing, do you think?
It really is an incredible amount of work to put together a conference where 29 speakers agree to go. So it is pretty extreme that they ended up canceling it. In terms of what they could have done, I completely agree. They could have done any of those things that you had mentioned. As to the reason why, I mean, a lot of students these days get really upset, particularly the leftist crowd, whenever these types of things happen. So basically, I think this is kind of just damage control from the university. They said, look, the students are going to go absolutely insane over this, so why don't we just cancel and not do the right thing, basically.
Well, it is really remarkable, too, when you think about the fact that I could see if this was a race-blind conference on some social issue, and it was primarily 30 white men you brought on board. We certainly understand why that would freak the academic left out. But in this instance, it was a women's conference, and the suggestion seems to be that women's matters have to be mediated like everything else through the lens of race, right? That it's not enough to have a collection of women speaking on women's issues. You have to have some kind of diversity to that as well. So we see that many of the subgroups, the progressive subgroups, are themselves now being picked apart on the basis of race or class or gender. And I guess this is what they call intersectionality on college campuses, isn't it? That no matter how progressive the initial group is, if they're not progressive in the ways collectively across the board, then you have an epic fail here, right? Is that fair to say?
That's extremely fair to say. I mean, it all comes down to intersectionality. I mean, basically, women's groups are definitely prioritized above men's groups in this case. So as you said, people would be absolutely freaking out if it was 30 white men instead of 30 white women. But then once you get to 30 white women, then there's another group below. It's a hierarchy. It really is a hierarchy, and it's pretty disturbing to see this keep unfolding like this as it has over and over and over.
That's right. And you got to imagine if they did manage to bring 15 women of color in to balance out the 15 white women, then we'd have to decide how many of them were transgender, how many of them were gay, and on and on and on it goes. To read more stories like Matthew's, follow the College Fix on Twitter and Facebook. Matthew Stein of Swarthmore College, thank you so much for your time today. Time now for Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix editor Jennifer Cabani for a conversation about St. Catherine's University canceling a women's empowerment conference because of an absence of minority women. Jennifer, discuss this story from your role as editor of The Fix. What was your first reaction when you saw the story?
Well, this is the type of story that we see, unfortunately, on the College Fix all the time, where everything, all the priorities and importance is placed on skin color as opposed to content of people's character. And whether it's a medieval conference that has too many white speakers, as we've seen people complain about, or a Stanford history conference recently drew criticism because it had too many white people, or this women's conference, a really wonderful, positive way to empower women, inspire them. And yet, because the women speakers were white, the entire thing was canceled.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. That's the big problem for me. Why couldn't you just move forward with the conference? The idea that somehow women won't benefit unless there's a token representation of minority voices is odd. Seems that there's a lot could have been said about this. You could have even had a breakout panel about how to get more minority women the next time, but rather everybody had to suffer for it. This reminds me of something that I think is really kind of interesting. It's amazing how the academic left is now starting to eat itself. Have we noticed this, right? This is a conference of almost incredibly liberal women, liberal professors, who found themselves at the staring down the barrel of the social progressive gun here, right? So there's so few conservative voices on campus. The liberal voices are being gobbled up now.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, in this particular case, what we're seeing is, and they could have invited a couple of minority speakers. Why did they have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? If that was the issue. I mean, some young professionals really lost out on a great opportunity to be inspired. But underscoring that, what are we teaching our young people? That just because somebody doesn't have the same skin color as you means you can't learn from them, you can't be inspired from them, you can't grow by hearing what they have to say. It's a horrible message.
Yeah, absolutely. Intellect, ideas, life experience, these things don't really matter much anymore. It's all the diversity fan, right? As long as we're parading people who look different but think the same, then we're fine. And the other thing I want to throw out there is this is the definition, isn't it, of intersectionality. Even at a women's conference on a very progressive campus, a feminist women's conference on a very progressive female-only school student body campus, even there, it's not enough to pitch that. You have to bring in the other aspects aspects of the grievance industry. And you wonder if they had brought in, say 5% or 10% of the speakers actually were minority speakers. At that point, do you start to figure, well, how many transgender speakers do we have? How many Vietnam veteran speakers do we have? Where does that kind of stuff end?
Yeah, it doesn't end. The left looks at everything through identity politics, gender, sex, race, and it's dividing America. What I always tell my children is, hey, we're Americans. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. You know, we're all created equal. We all were granted rights by our creator, and we're all Americans, you know, batting for the same team. So let's stop dividing. Let's stop judging people based on their skin color. And let's come together as Americans to learn and live and love and grow.
That's very well said. I've been in the universities for about 25 years. The thing that I notice is that American academics don't seem to like to acknowledge that there is an American culture, that the idea there is such a thing as an American ethnicity, if you will, an American culture, American cultural values. There seems to be this perception that all that stuff was either stolen or colonized, that it doesn't exist. And so America is perhaps the one country in the world that's not allowed to be proud of a heritage, it's not allowed to call for what you just called for, unity, because that seems to be offensive. I don't know how we got here.
Yeah, unfortunately, Lincoln once said that the only way America is going to fall is if it's the enemy within. And one of the enemies within are definitely found on college campuses today, unfortunately.
Be sure to stay up on all of the latest news and information from the College Fix editors by joining us on all of our social media platforms. Jennifer Cabani, editor of the College Fix, thanks so much for your time today. A women's empowerment and leadership conference at St. Catherine's University in Minnesota was canceled last week after it turned out that all 29 speakers were white. The conference, called the Leadership Imperative, Rise to Your Purpose, Tony Robbins, Call Your Office, was designed to equip both emerging and seasoned female professionals with the tools they need to become impactful, respected leaders. Now, this just absolutely blows me away. In the first place, St. Catherine's is an undergraduate-only women's college, right? So the only undergraduates there are women. That's remarkable in its own right. So they're very bothered about not having diverse women when it comes to a forum that at a school where they don't have men at all. That's the first problem I have with this. Second problem I have with this is, according to an email that the university sent out explaining the cancellation, quote, speaker credentials are strong, but organizers are concerned that selecting quality speakers led to a racial and ethnic blind outcome. How in the world have we reached the point where a racial and blind outcome is not what we want? We really, really, really want to go back to judging people on the color of their skin or their gender? We really want to get back to the good old days of pre-Jim Crow, where people's ethnicity determined what they are? That seems to be the argument being made by this school. And why cancel the event? Really? You got an entire undergraduate college full of women. You couldn't have, at the last minute, invited other speakers or Skyped them in or created a panel of your own students to talk about the lack of diversity among the women at the college there, or just, like I said, cull from your own students and bring some of them up. Although it is Minnesota, so the odds of having a huge population of undergraduate non-white females is probably pretty low. And so what does this tell us in the final analysis? What's the final fix here? Intersectionality rears its ugly head. We have reached the point where it's not enough to be a woman at a all-women's conference to empower other women. Now you have to make sure that you have all the diversity angles covered. And look, even if they had half a dozen African-American and Hispanic women, then we'd have to start asking ourselves, right? What is the sexuality of those women? Are there enough homosexual women? What about gender? Are there enough men transgendering into women to make this balance? What about class distinctions, right? Do they have poor women? Do they have really rich women? Is there a spectrum of that? What about the other abled? What about Vietnam veteran women? It just goes on and on. This is the spawn of intersectionality. It's the idea that we have to bring all of our fetishes for race and class and gender and 1,000 other things to bear on every single thing we do. In other words, what you're telling American kids is the only people you can learn from are people who are exactly like you. You cannot learn from, you cannot listen to, you cannot get anything profitable from anybody unless everybody's represented all the time. And that just doesn't work. And that's the final fix. I'm Dr. Duke, and we'll see you next time. For more videos and original articles, visit thecollegefix.com. And don't forget to like The College Fix on Facebook and follow on Twitter to receive your daily dose of right-minded news and commentary from across the nation.